I'm so glad to have this opportunity to share a little bit during this exhibition, this salon, on what I like to call, or what is often called, I+1. And so we're going to be starting off with what exactly is I+1? That's our goal today. Okay, so welcome everyone. This is my talk, Joseph Calpin, brought to you by Studio Classroom. And this talk is entitled I+1, a framework for learning. And here I used to be, you might have seen me before on the Studio Classroom's YouTube channel, either for Let's Talk in English or Studio Classroom or InfoCloud. Studio Classroom, friend for life. Now, friends, we want to be able to enhance our ability to learn English. And this idea of I+1 is a great way to really get more out of your learning. Because honestly, when it comes to language learning, we exist between two areas. Either language learning is too easy. Hello, how are you? I'm fine, thank you. And we find it boring. And so we're like this image here of the girl just passed out, sleeping, snoozing in classes, in Bushiban, wherever you happen to be. Or we're on the opposite side, where the language learning process is just super stressful. What is this American trying to say? What does it mean to knock it out of the park? What am I knocking? Where is the park? All of these weird expressions that we're just not used to. And so we often bounce back and forth between too easy and too hard. And this is kind of where I+1 comes in. Now, I've now said this phrase I+1 several times. So you might be thinking, all right, Joe, what is I+1? And that's where we're going to start today, defining I+1. And then we'll move on to how you use I+1. And then bridging the gap. Now, the gap, what is it? You're going to find out soon enough. Just wait. So, defining I+1. This actually isn't really a new idea. I+1 started in kind of the late 70s, early 80s as a way to figure out how people learn languages and how we can help motivate people and help give them sort of the building blocks, help them progress in a way that pushes them gently out of their comfort zone into a higher level of speaking. And so here it is, I+1 in a nutshell. Basically, simply put, I, this letter here, equals how much you can understand. It's where your comprehension is right now. When you open up a novel or you watch a YouTube video, what's your percentage of understanding? 50%, 80%? How much do you know just with the vocabulary you've learned, the grammar you have? What do you know? Now, the +1 here is content that's just slightly beyond what you know. So I+1 would basically be, maybe I'm reading a book and I understand 80%, 90%. There's still this chunk, this 20% that I have left, but for the most part, I know what's going on. And I+1 is what we refer to as comprehensible input. Comprehensible input. Input that you can actually understand. Basically, when we do language learning, we have, I don't know about you, but for me, I'm often trying to read the most advanced things really, really quickly. I want to read that hard book, this classical piece of literature. I want to be able to watch movies, no subtitles. I want that right away. But at a lower level, that is not comprehensible input. I actually have no idea what I'm reading. I have no idea what they're saying. I'm not actually getting anything out of the language learning experience. It's not comprehensible input, it's incomprehensible input. And that is not language learning. That's just me being confused and just sitting there. What are they saying? What am I reading? It's not comprehensible. And so there's this other idea when it comes to I+1. And I like this metaphor of weightlifting. So one idea of I+1 is to continue to motivate you to leave your comfort zone. So for those of you who are watching, where you're like, listen, man, I've been learning English since I was like 3. I don't need this. Well, I+1 helps push us out of the comfort zone where we're constantly seeking that +1, that +1. I want to push myself. I want to find stuff I don't know. Okay, so weightlifting. I have been trapped in my apartment since most of my classes for Shida are online. And so down here, below my desk, I have weights. Can you see them? Yeah, you can. Okay, so I have this 2.5 kilogram dumbbell. Now, if you can imagine, if I am constantly working out and I'm just using this weight, what's gonna happen? Eventually, this weight, it's going to start feeling lighter. It's not gonna be as difficult to lift it. And okay, admittedly, I haven't been working out that hard because this is still challenging. I'm kind of a weakling right now. Don't judge me. Anyway, but if I keep doing it, and I keep doing it, it's gonna get lighter and lighter and lighter, and it's gonna get easier to do. What's the problem here though? Eventually, I'm not actually getting anything out of the weightlifting experience, or what we're talking about here, the language learning experience. There's no growth, there's nothing happening. And that's a problem, because now we're not pushing ourselves forward, we're kind of stagnating. What this might look like in a language learning context is, you know all the right words to order your food, you know all the right words to get that business email, you know all the right words to do the presentation for when your overseas clients come to Taipei, whatever. The problem here is eventually you stagnate. You're not working on new words, you're not learning new things. What do? Well, in a weightlifting context, you either do more repetitions or you add weight, and you continue to add weight as you grow. And this is one of the other fundamental ideas of I+1. So I+1 basically does 2 things for us. One, it helps us from being overstressed because it's always just a little bit beyond what we understand. 2, it continues to push us gently out of our comfort zone so that we can get a better learning experience so that we can grow. Now, I like this idea of the canyon. So we've got this gap here, right? And it's a beautiful image, but the tricky thing here is what's on either side. On one side, we have our textbooks, the books that you use in the classroom, that you're trying to learn English through simple dialogues and grammar points. But then on the other side is native speaker materials, you know, your novels, your YouTube channels, people who are like, hey man, smash like, and you're like, wait, what am I smashing? There's this really big gap between what textbooks can teach us and what native speakers do. And it doesn't really matter how advanced the textbook is. This gap almost always exists. I'll give you an example. I'm learning Chinese. I'm trying to learn Chinese. And as I get to more advanced books, you would think that the Chinese would become more natural, right? Because in the beginning, it's all basic phrases, it's done with basic grammar, where maybe more advanced grammar would be used. And then as you get to an advanced textbook, okay, now we're using more native phrases. But recently, I had the highest level textbook out of a series, and I handed it to a Taiwanese person, and they're like, what is this? No one says this. Why are you saying this? And all of a sudden, it's like, oh no! And so here, textbooks, they can often be very limited compared to native speaking materials. And this I+1 journey is part of the journey to help bridge the gap to get us from textbooks to being able to enjoy native speaker materials. Now, I want to think about common advice that we often get during the language learning process. So let's look at reading, for example. People will say, okay, you're learning how to read. Start with children's books. They're simple, so, you know, makes for a good start. The problem oftentimes with children's literature is that it's about folklore from the native culture, right? It might be stories from Europe, for instance, with English. It might be like old English stories or different fairy tales. And it's often kind of fantastical, which makes it really difficult to understand. I remember trying to follow this advice while learning Japanese, and all of a sudden I'm reading about like Momotaro, who is like a boy who was born out of a peach, who fought some like Oni on an island with his dog and some other animal friends. And it gets kind of strange, and that's not exactly helpful at a beginner level when I can barely order. And so this advice can be very tricky because while on the surface, you're like, okay, a 5-year-old can understand this. Surely I can. But on the other hand, you don't know the culture's background like that, and there's a lot of strange words you normally don't use. Or let's talk about listening. People will say, okay, there are all these free podcasts online. Use those, they're so great. True, there are tons of podcasts. A lot of them are free, and there are even podcasts that are geared toward language learners, which are great, highly recommend them. But most podcasts, they're not targeted to second language learners. They're targeted to native speakers who are sitting in their car, commuting to work, wherever they're going. And there are no visual aids. You're just listening to something. This really can make picking up new words, understanding grammar patterns, really difficult. So there's kind of a challenge here. Yes, there are podcasts you can listen to, but it's not every podcast that can really help you. And then fluency. A lot of people, they like to learn English by watching movies. They watch movies and they have the subtitles there. They can pick up really great slang, some more popular terminology. And oftentimes people who learn by watching movies, they can really start to sound like a native speaker, especially if they watch enough. The tricky thing here is that many people, including myself, we often rely completely on subtitles that are done in our native language. Friends, let's be honest, everyone's watching Korean dramas, right? But how many of us really actually know Korean? So we know, say, oh, 안녕하세요 and 감사합니다, but we're not really getting beyond basic greetings. And part of that's because as we're enjoying content, we're not using this sort of I+1, we're just reading the subtitles in our native languages. And so I don't know about you, but when I'm reading subtitles in English for like a Japanese show or a Chinese show, if you were to ask me, oh, well, what did they just say in their language? I don't know, but I can tell you what I've read. And so I'm not really building on that fluency. So these are all kind of issues that we have when we're doing language training, when we're learning a new language and we're trying to hit these different areas. Yes, this is the common advice. Children's books are great, podcasts are great, movies are great, but there are problems. We're not really building ourselves to comprehensible input. And that's something we need to work on. So this leads us to our next big point, utilizing I+1, utilizing comprehensible input. So this is kind of the basics, what you need to get I+1 to work for you. The first step is understanding your current level. Let's go back to the gym metaphor. Could you imagine with me? It's January. You've made your New Year's resolution, right? 新年新希望. And you decided to go to the gym and sign up for that membership. Now, could you imagine if your first day at the gym, you decide you're going to do all the advanced classes for yoga and the dance classes, Zumba, and then you're gonna go lift weights and you're gonna do the heaviest setting possible. I know what you're saying. Joe, that's dumb. No one would do that. Okay, someone would do that, I'm sure. I'm not saying I've done it. Anyway, but we often do this with language training. A friend of mine who was learning Japanese, he was asking for advice about reading. And he said, okay, I've got basic Japanese, what can I read? And people were giving simple suggestions. And he said, oh, well, what I'm really wanting to read is a sci-fi novel. This is not understanding your current level. If you're at a beginner level, you should probably do things that are more suitable for beginners. If you're at intermediate, do things for that, advanced, so on. And so understanding your current level, that I, is the first step for using I+1. Second step, know what you want to learn. This is really important because a lot of times when we say, oh, I want to learn insert language, there are a lot of different aspects of the language that you can learn. So if I say, oh, I want to learn Chinese, what do I want to learn? Am I trying to learn how to write in Chinese, how to read in Chinese, how to do better listening in Chinese? And with listening, am I interested in listening to like dramas? Or am I interested in being able to listen to the news so I can know what I'm angry about? Now, that's really important because we need to know, as language learners, what do we care about? What are we interested in? And so our second step here, know what you want to learn. So for example, I'm more interested in things like politics, history, and so I learn things and I pick material based on that interest. My wife, on the other hand, is obsessed with birds and different animals and fish. And so her Chinese in this area is absolutely mind-blowingly good to me because I don't know anything. She can see a bird and know exactly what it's called in Chinese. And I just know it's bird. And so knowing what you want to learn is important here because it'll help you kind of keep your motivation up. The final thing here is having a careful eye for material. And so a lot of times when I'm picking materials to learn for my language training, I often try to kind of preview to make sure it's suitable. Do the words seem too hard? When I read the first 5 pages or so, how much of it do I understand? If it's below 80%, I might put the book down because it's a little too difficult for me. So being able to measure how the material matches your current level is another good skill to be building up and using for I+1 for comprehensible input. So let's talk about some examples of this. Selecting genres of stuff to learn. Now, if you're like me, you're at a basic level of learning a language, like I am, Japanese. I highly recommend something like what we call the slice of life. Slice of life essentially are really stories that are about everyday things. So for example, the show here is called Yurukyan, Laid Back Camping. It's about girls who they have a camping club in their high school and they go to cool places in Japan to go camping. Really, really basic story, but lots of common vocabulary because they have to go shopping. They have to know how to set up their tents. And so it's like step 1, step 2, step 3. They talk about directions. Oh, when you go down this road, take the left, take the right. And so slice of life, these sorts of stories, which maybe for English, older show-wise would be something like Friends or How I Met Your Mother. Those sorts of shows are really great. Now, crime dramas, those can be a little bit tricky for this sort of thing. Or, you're learning English and you decide I'm going to watch Game of Thrones or something really, really hard for a non-native English speaker. If you want to enjoy that content, that's great. But if you want to use it for language training, now you pick something that's just a hair too hard. So if you're starting out with something, if you're starting out with your training, you want to pick something that's really suitable for beginner and intermediate, slice of life is the way to go. Now, let's talk about the subtitles. All right, now recently Stranger Things came out on Netflix. I haven't started watching season 4 because I'm not done writing my final papers and I can't start watching the show until I do that. It's my mission right now. And now, this person, they are not speaking Chinese. Subtitles, they are. And like I mentioned before, when it comes to subtitles, we're often just reading. We're reading the subtitles and it's very, very difficult to read the subtitles and be able to listen. And we can't just read our shows. It's not helping our training. And so basically, because watching things online right now is a really common way of learning languages. You've got Netflix, you've got Disney+, you have all these different services, even things on YouTube, right? So what we need to think about is how to use subtitles appropriately. And this plays into I+1 because we're wanting to build up gradually our level of comprehension. So you might have something like this. Let's check this out. So on the right here, we have our first step. You watch with subtitles, but the subtitles are in your native language. Now the goal with this, what we're trying to achieve here is understanding the basics of the story. What's happening, who are the characters, what's going on. And so you're just sort of taking in the show. Now, you might pick up a couple of common phrases, the way they say hello, the way they say goodbye, the way they argue with each other. But for the most part, you're just trying to understand what's happening. Then you go down into the bottom here, stage 2. where now you're watching with subtitles in the target language. Now, this is a really great step, and I use this a lot in Chinese and Japanese now, where my comprehension has gotten to the point where I can sometimes skip stage 1 and go right to stage 2, because my reading level is starting to get higher, and I don't need to really use my native language to quite understand what's happening in the story, but without subtitles, I get confused. So you watch with subtitles in the target language. This is great because now you are both hearing and you are reading in your target language. The other thing here is sometimes in shows, people speak with accents, they speak very quickly, it's a little difficult to understand, and with those subtitles, you can see very clearly what they are saying. And so this is another great step. It also makes for a really great language learning habit because you are both hearing, reading, and it helps you remember these words and these grammar patterns better. Okay, but if we just stop there, we're missing out on some really great listening training. And so we have to go over to stage 3, which is watch without any subtitles at all. This, even I find really difficult. People speak so fast in Chinese shows, so fast in Japanese, that even after I've watched it with the subtitles on, sometimes I still don't, wait, what was that? Try again? It's still a little bit challenging, but it pushes and trains your ear. Now, how this fits with I+1. At each stage, you're gradually building up your understanding, right? From very, very low with step 1, gradually going up into step 2, and then finally full comprehension, step 3. Now, I can hear you. Do I really need to watch the same show 3 times? Maybe not, but I try to pick shows I really, really like so that if I have to watch it 3 times like this, great. I think the other thing you'll find is as you start to do this process with the shows that you watch, at first you'll have to do all 3 steps. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And then eventually you'll hit where I'm at, where it's just 2, 3, 2, 3, 2, 3. And at some point, your vocabulary and your grammar are going to grow to the point where that I is automatically at step 3. You don't really need the subtitles. You can just listen and identify, I don't know that word. What was that? But the rest of it you understand. So that's how this process really fits with I+1. And I hope for all of those of you who are watching that you'll try this out and watch more shows and not just watch them in Chinese. Because also sometimes Chinese translations of things can be a little strange. Now, we've got to talk about this idea of bridging the gap. Because even with all of our steps, all of our tools that we've talked about, there can often still be a sizable gap between our textbook materials, what we use in classrooms, and native speaker materials, right? We've got this gap. Doof. And here, what I want to point out is that Studio Classroom's materials, these sort of magazines and YouTube videos, you can check out their channels, they can really help to create a nice, steady bridge between these two. Some of you, as you've been listening to this talk, you might be thinking like, okay, watching a show 3 times, taking all these steps, gosh, it sounds exhausting. I'm working, I get off late, I've got kids at home, I don't have time for all of this, like choosing and trying to figure out my levels. Totally makes sense. I absolutely get you. All of us are super busy. And that's what's nice about materials like Studio Classroom, Let's Talk in English, Advanced, is because they sort of take the guesswork out of the equation so you can very easily figure out what your I+1 is with this material. And so I+1 in a nutshell here, it looks like you have leveled articles where you open up a magazine or you open up this content in an app and it'll tell you, okay, star 1, pretty basic. Star 2, kind of difficult. And then a 3-star article, it's pretty hard. It's leveled, so you can look at it right away and know. This helps you sort of skip the step of, I need to look at something very closely to identify how difficult it's going to be. Also, you've got very topical materials One of the hard things about textbooks is that some of us will be using textbooks that were published 20 years ago, 30 years ago. I remember when I first started learning Chinese, it was 2009, and I was using a textbook that still had 录音带. No one in 2009 is using a 录音带. No one's using like a cassette to watch things or a videotape. It's just not the thing. And so textbooks can often be stuck in the past. And so what's nice about magazine materials like this is you're getting content that is maybe more focused on a holiday that's going on or a special trend that's happening. So you're really able to stay in step with the progression of language and current events, which is great. Also, you've got a lot of diverse input. With a magazine like this, something that's nice is that you have audio recordings and you have the actual text itself. You have videos you can watch. There's a lot there that can help you build your comprehension from several different angles. And once you have that, you're going to see language growth happen in a very nice, sort of smooth, but also dynamic way. I want to focus here, though, just a moment on this second point here, the idea of topical materials. So let's look at that. This is an example from this month's Let's Talk in English. I used to write for Let's Talk in English. It's like my baby. I love it. Let's Talk in English, for those of you who don't necessarily use the magazine, this is, right, a lower level magazine, lower level content to help you get speaking and to be able to really get the basics of the English language. Now let's look at the layout or the content that they have for this month. First of all, June, graduation season. Boom, happy graduation. This is great. You're going to get good vocabulary for events that are happening right at this moment. Now, you also get a number of very practical things, right? How to make a reservation, how to look at, and also notice here on the second row here, the visual, a department store directory. Very practical things as well that not only have text, and also you have your audio through their video materials, but you also have a visual here, right? You have a department store directory. The other thing that I really like is that you have kind of travel articles and e-report, things that can help to expand your vocabulary in a way that a textbook isn't necessarily going to do for you. There are very few textbooks that are going to talk about Matsu, right? And then allow you to be able to maybe encounter a foreigner in Taipei, wherever you are, and be able to talk about these different kinds of places. And also you get sort of more cultural information, right? If you look at that second row, amazing Arizona. Now you're able to learn a little bit more about the states and a specific location, which again, a textbook might not have. And then in native speaking materials, the vocabulary might be a lot more difficult than what you're ready to handle at the moment. And so this is a very nice, gentle way of starting to bridge that gap of being able to go from textbook materials into native speaker materials. Also, notice in the bottom left corner there, also talking about podcasts, but probably really good tips about how to use said podcasts. Now, one other thing that I think is really powerful when it comes to language learning is having text and audio. I've mentioned this already several times through our little talk together today. Text and audio is, when you put it together, when you put these two elements together, are almost magical in what they can do for your comprehension. This guy here, Steve Kaufman, he is a super amazing polyglot. Joe, what's a polyglot? A polyglot is somebody who speaks multiple languages, but we're not talking 2 or 3 or 4. We're often talking 5 languages or more. Polyglots can often be quite rare, but this particular person, he shares a lot about how he learns languages. And every single video he does on language learning, he almost always stresses that having text and audio is the best way to boost your comprehension. We started to hit on that with, of course, subtitles, but also studio classroom materials, Let's Talk. One of the things that I really love about it is that it combines this idea of having text and audio. You're having it read by native speakers, which is even better. So, for example, let's just take a moment to look at a video from Let's Talk in June this month. So this is an episode about yogurt. Nice. Let's give it a listen.
Thundrea.
Yogurt is a delicious food. It can be healthy for you too. Yogurt is a milk product, so it's good for your teeth and bones. It is also good for your skin. You can eat yogurt for breakfast. It is good with cereal.
Okay, so we're gonna pause there for just a moment, because here I want to point out and emphasize what's really nice is now you're not just reading this content, you're also able to hear somebody reading it to you with the proper pronunciation, with the proper intonation. So you're able to not just see some new words, but also hear how it should be said, what kind of flow you need while reading it. And that can be really, really powerful for building up not just your comprehension of a word, its meaning, the way it sounds, but also being able to eventually say the word, which is very important. And so here, in talking about I+1, one of the best ways to build comprehension is to combine that text and audio. And that's something that instead of having to look for all this content, you have all these magazines and all this video content right there at your fingertips. And so friends, we want to, there we go, talk about the takeaway. What's the basics from what we've been talking about today? First of all, with I+1, you can make your language journey comprehensible. You don't have to struggle like I did, finding all this weird material that you don't understand, wasting your time. Second, you can make it low stress. When you find something that's just a little bit more difficult, then it's kind of exciting because your goal is in reach. You're not as stressed out in the process of trying to learn the language and get these words. It's just a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. There's also high interest because you're now also trying to pick materials that are topical, that you are excited about, which will make you want to continue that journey of I+1. And so with this, I hope that you're equipped, you feel equipped to empower your language journey, to be able to take on new challenges as you go from that really big gap between textbook materials and native speaker materials. Thanks so much and have a lovely day. 今天我在分享的是叫做 I+1， 这个是一个语言学习一个方式。那 I+1 它针对的问题是这个，左边我们有教科书，右边是母语者所用的小说、所看的电影的电视节目。我们通常从教科书到这些外国人在用的在看的东西，其实很难跨过去。就像我们去健身房一样，我们在举重，我们要找到对自己很适合的程度，但是不要太简单，不要太容易，不然不会有进步。所以 I+1 它基本上是这样子 ，I 是你现在可以理解的程度，是按照你所知道的词汇或者语法，你按照这个就是你现在的程度。然后 +1 它是要你找到比较难的，但是不要太难的。所以比如说你在读一个英文的小说，要是你可以理解80%以上，这个是 I+1。但假如说你只懂50%，就50%，这个不够，会让你自己很累，也会让阅读的过程枯燥无味，就不好玩，不要这样子。所以呢，你要用这个 I+1， 另外一个要注意的现象是，你要知道你要学的是什么。比如说，你对棒球感兴趣，那你就是要学这些词汇， 或者你对历史感兴趣，但要慢慢的找一些对你来说很适合的历史的教材。然后另外一个需要的能力是能够判断你用的教材对你来说适不适合。你做了这个，慢慢找到一些对你适合，但是还是会让你进步的教材，你就会顺利进步。好，谢谢大家。